My name is Gianna. I'm 28 years old. By the last hour of my husband's memorial, I had stopped feeling my feet. Not because the heels hurt less, because grief had started replacing ordinary sensations with sound. Rain kept touching the church windows in soft, patient taps. Porcelain clicked somewhere behind me. A coffee urn hissed. The room smelled like lilies, damp wool, expensive perfume, dark roast, and old wood polish baked warm under church lights. I sat in the back of the reception room with the folded funeral program flattened between both hands, staring past people without really seeing them. My husband was in the ground. The priest had already left. Half the neighbors were on their second round of condolences. And his family did not look shattered, they looked organized. My mother-in-law, Elaine, Mev stood near the catering table moving place cards with crisp, irritated fingers, like death had merely complicated logistics. My brother-in-law, Nolan, kept pulling people aside in short, urgent bursts, speaking low, leaning close, doing that male thing where secrecy tries to wear the costume of responsibility. And Ethan's business partner, Reed Holloway, would not look at me at all. Not once. That was what finally started to scratch at the numbness. Because grief looks one way, avoidance looks another. I noticed Arthur Bell because he did not belong to the rhythm of the room. He stood near the side hallway with an old leather briefcase resting against his leg, quiet in a way that made everyone else feel louder. But he waited until the last of the neighbors began drifting toward the parking lot and the church staff started stacking silver trays. Then he came to me. He didn't crouch. He didn't put on a sad face. He just said my name softly. Gianna, I need a private word before you leave. There was no funeral softness in his voice, no staged pity, just instruction. I followed him down a narrow side hall into a small office beside the vestry where a single brass lamp threw warm light against dark paneling and a wall clock made every second sound heavier than it should. He shut the door, set the briefcase on the desk, opened it. Then he placed a small black flash drive between us. That was the moment the day changed. Not when I saw Ethan lowered into the ground. Not when I heard ashes to ashes. Here, in a church office that smelled faintly of paper and dust and lemon oil, with a cheap piece of plastic sitting on a desk between a widow and an old lawyer. I stared at it. It looked insultingly ordinary. My husband was dead, and what he had left in front of me was something no bigger than a stick of gum. Arthur folded his hands. Your husband instructed me to give this to you only after burial, not before, not in front of family, not under any pressure. My fingers were stiff when I reached for it. I almost dropped it. Arthur watched my hand, then my face. He was very specific, he said. He said if you were receiving it, events had likely begun exactly as he feared. I looked up. Did he ever tell you he expected trouble? For 1 second I couldn't answer, because the question pulled too many things loose at once. And the last month of Ethan's life. The late-night calls on the back patio. The way he started locking his office door, even inside our own house. The way he'd pause before answering simple questions, like his mind had gotten crowded somewhere I couldn't follow. The way he kissed me longer than usual that Monday morning before he left for work. No, he had not told me, not plainly. But suddenly I could feel the outline of everything he had almost said. Not like this, I whispered. Arthur gave one small nod. Do not open anything in that room out there, he said. Do not sign anything tonight. Do not let anyone take you home unless you choose it, and don't tell them you have this. The clock kept ticking. Rain kept tapping the glass. I stared at him. What's on it? Arthur looked down once, then back at me. Enough to protect you, he said. A beat. Perhaps more than that. I slid the flash drive into the inside pocket of my coat. And for the first time that whole day, fear cut cleanly through the numbness. Not the clean grief fear of loss. Something dirtier. Something with shape. When I walked back into the reception hall, Elaine was already turning toward me. There you are, sweetheart. She came to me with her arms half open and her face arranged into that careful expression rich women wear when they want sorrow to read as dignity. We were worried you slipped out. She smelled like church flowers, an expensive perfume, and a little too much composure. Her hand closed around my wrist for half a second too long. Arthur didn't burden you with estate matters today, did he? I told him that could wait. Burden. Gee, that word stayed in my head. Burden. Like information was something too heavy for me to carry, but not too heavy for them to move. No, I said. He just offered condolences. Her eyes moved over my face, quick and searching. Not for pain, for evidence. Nolan appeared beside her holding a paper Starbucks cup somebody must have picked up from the plaza down the road. Even in a black suit, he carried himself like a man permanently offended by delay. We can swing by the house tomorrow, he said. Help sort through things. Dad always said paperwork gets ugly fast. Their father had been dead 3 years. Nolan still used him like borrowed authority. Tomorrow won't work. His smile came too quickly, too smooth. We're just trying to make this easier. No one says easier when they mean kind. Oh, they say easier when they mean faster. Easier for them. Across the room, Reed finally glanced at me, then away. His wife, Celeste, leaned up and said something into his ear. He looked pale. Not funeral pale. Exposure pale. I left before the rain got worse. The church parking lot reflected the security lights in long white streaks. My sedan smelled like wet wool, leather, and the half-empty peppermint gum pack rolling around in the center console. I got in, shut the door, and just sat there with both hands on the wheel and my forehead resting against the cold glass. The church doors stayed closed. Nobody came out looking for me. Nobody called my name. Good. At home, the house felt wrong in the way only recent absence can make a house feel wrong. Too intact. Too ready. The entry lamp cast the same amber pool over the console table. Ethan's shoes were still by the mat. His gray cashmere scarf still hung beside mine. A mug he had used 2 mornings before his stroke still sat in the drying rack near the sink because I had not been able to move it. The whole place looked like a life interrupted mid-sentence. Our house sat in Wellesley on a street full of clipped hedges, stone mailboxes, and people who measured morality in tasteful Christmas lights. 2 weeks earlier, I had texted Ethan from the DM-Fi about whether we needed more batteries for the front window candles. That version of my life felt obscene now. I locked the front door, then the back, then the side garage entry, and then I stood in the kitchen with my purse on the marble island and the dark window over the sink reflecting me back in pieces. Rain moved in silver lines down the glass. The coffee maker still held the grounds Ethan had measured the night before he died, because he always set it up before bed, even though we owned machines more expensive and more convenient. Small habits are what ambush you after loss. Not the big things, the stupid little faithful things. I took the flash drive out of my coat pocket and held it in my palm. It weighed almost nothing. Small things can carry the heaviest violence. The den had a desktop computer Ethan used for taxes, travel folders, home files, and the kind of shared adult admin that only looks boring until the person you shared it with is gone. I sat in his chair. The leather still held the shape of him. When I inserted the drive, a folder opened automatically. 6 sections. Start here, legal copies, financials, video, voice memos. If Arthur confirms. For a full 10 seconds, I couldn't move the mouse. The screen reflected a woman with funeral hair already slipping loose, mascara smeared at the edges, and a face that looked too young to be this alone. Then I clicked, Start here. There was a video file at the top, 11 minutes, 19 seconds. I hit play. And Ethan appeared on the screen in his office at the firm. Navy suit, Tie loosened, shoulders rigid. He didn't look sick. He didn't look doomed. He looked alert, too alert. The kind of alert I had mistaken for stress because I loved him, and love can make danger look temporary. He looked straight into the camera. "Oh, if you're watching this, I need you to do two things first," he said. "Close the blinds and breathe before you panic." My lungs forgot how. I stood up so fast the chair rolled back, crossed the room, closed the blinds. When I sat down again, Ethan gave this small, crooked half smile that almost ruined me on contact. "Hi, Gigi." Only he called me that. No one else ever had. That one word hit harder than the funeral. I put a hand over my mouth and kept watching. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that word is weak beside what this means, but if Arthur followed instructions, then this is after my burial, which means I was right to worry and wrong not to tell you sooner." I stopped breathing properly. "Listen carefully," he said. "My death may be natural, accidental, or dressed that way. I'm not saying I know someone killed me. But I'm saying I know people around me have motive to profit from confusion, pressure, and speed. If my family starts urging paperwork, housing changes, memorial optics, or temporary account control, stall them. If Reed offers to handle anything, refuse him politely. If Celeste cries with you, tell her nothing. If Nolan acts protective, count your silver." He looked off screen for half a second, like he hated himself for saying it. "And if someone close to you steps in too easily after the funeral," he said, quieter now, "be careful with that person too. Grief makes decent people clumsy. It makes bad people efficient." I felt something cold move all the way down my back. He leaned closer. "You deserved to know months ago. I kept thinking I could fix it cleanly before it touched you. That was arrogance disguised as love." There it was. Not only warning, apology. "There are copies of transfer records, board communications, insurance filings, trust amendments, and voice memos," he said. "Arthur knows where the originals are. If events are unfolding normally, none of this should matter. If you're receiving this, events are not unfolding normally." He paused. Then his face changed. Not in expression, in truth. The effort went out of it. "Do not sign anything without Arthur. Do not leave the house because someone tells you it's healthier. Do not surrender my office keys, phone, laptop, or paper files. And do not assume the first betrayal is the deepest one." I whispered his name to a dead screen. "I moved one critical piece months ago. Quietly, legally. You won't understand it at first because I used language I knew they would overlook. Arthur will explain. Sure, it gives you leverage. Maybe enough." His throat worked when he swallowed. "I should have protected you without involving you. Since I failed at that, this is the next best thing. I need you to finish what I started. Not for the money, not for pride, for record, for truth. They're going to try to rewrite our marriage as sentiment, and my work as inheritance. Neither is true." Then softer. "You were the only honest home I had." That line split me open. People say grief comes in waves. Mine didn't. Mine felt like glass. Silent. Then suddenly everywhere. I watched the rest of the video without moving, tears sliding down my face, while the rest of my body stayed frozen. Ethan told me where the hidden panel was in the guest room closet. He told me the passcode pattern for his encrypted phone notes. That he told me Arthur held a sealed letter for probate court if certain signatures started appearing too quickly after his death. He told me he loved me 3 times. Not once. 3. Each one different. By the time the video ended, my hand hurt from gripping the edge of the desk. I clicked legal copies next. Trust amendments, share allocation summaries, a deed transfer note, a letter drafted for Norfolk County Probate and Family Court. Then one file title stopped me cold. County Clerk. Case number 2024-17823. I opened it and found a notarized property and beneficial interest registry reference tied to a holding company I had never heard of. Hawthorne Meridian Holdings, LLC. I read the page once, then again. Then a third time because my brain refused to let the meaning settle. 8 months earlier, Ethan had transferred a survivorship-triggered controlling interest into a protected spousal structure. My name was on it, not in some sentimental widow clause, not tucked into condolence language, not as a beneficiary who got flowers and sympathy, in control. I clicked financials and my breathing changed again. Spreadsheets, reimbursement loops, shell vendors, internal authorizations with Reed's digital sign-off, insurance projections tied to an event window, a document called Post-Founder Death Stabilization Options, and under that document, one line. Preferred path, remove spousal voting influence, preferred path. They had already built a phrase for erasing me. The next file was a voice memo Ethan had recorded in his car. Thursday, 8:40 p.m. Reed thinks I'll sign the revised liquidity package next week. I won't. Elaine knows less than she pretends. Nolan knows more than he admits. And Celeste is carrying information between households. If anything happens to me, timing matters. Watch who pressures Gianna in the first 72 hours. That will tell you who expects momentum. I paused the memo and looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. We were still inside the first 72 hours. As if on cue, my phone lit up on the desk. Nolan. I let it ring, then Elaine, then Celeste, then a text from Reed. We should meet tomorrow. There are urgent company formalities that affect everyone. Everyone. Another liar's word. Then a different name lit the screen. Ava. Ava Marino had been my closest friend since college. She knew every crack in my life because she had either witnessed them or sat with me after. She was there in the hospital. She was there with dry shampoo, a cheap charger, and sweatpants when I had nothing left in me except paperwork and shock. Relief reaches for familiar shapes before logic can stop it. I answered. Hey. I was about to come over, she said. Are you okay? No, but the more dangerous truth was how badly I wanted her to sound safe. Not tonight. Gianna, you shouldn't be alone. I looked at the frozen frame of Ethan still on the screen. If someone close to you steps in too easily after the funeral, be careful with that person too. I hated him for putting that sentence inside my head right before I needed comfort. I need to sleep, I said. There was the smallest pause. Just half a beat. Then Ava said, Did Arthur say anything to you tonight? My whole spine went cold. I didn't answer right away. Why? Reed mentioned the lawyer was acting strange. I just don't want you blindsided. Reed mentioned. To Ava. I kept my voice flat. I'm exhausted. I'll call tomorrow. Then I hung up before my voice could turn into something she would hear. I sat there in the dark den with Ethan's screen still glowing in front of me and understood something ugly and clear. Grief was not private anymore. It had become a marketplace. The next morning I woke up twisted on the living room sofa with a throw blanket half on the floor and a headache pressing behind my eyes. Pale daylight pushed through the windows. My phone had 14 notifications. 3 were from Elaine. We need to review household transitions. Nolan can stop by with breakfast and some forms. It would be best to keep things moving while emotions are fresh and everyone is cooperative. Emotions are fresh, as if mourning had an efficiency window. 2 texts from Reed, asking for 15 minutes, strictly to simplify matters. 1 from Celeste with too many heart emojis and no actual content. And 1 from Ava. I'm heading to Starbucks. I can bring your usual. There are kindnesses that arrive warm. There are kindnesses that arrive timed. I did not answer any of them. I showered, pulled on jeans and a camel sweater, tied my hair back, went upstairs to the guest room closet. The hidden panel was exactly where Ethan said it would be, behind the lower shelf trim. Inside was a fireproof pouch, 2 old passports, a slim key, and a folded, handwritten note, for Gianna only. I sat on the closet carpet to read it. If you found this, Arthur has already started helping. Use the key for the downtown storage box in my name and yours. Go only after you speak with him. Nolan will go for visible assets. Reed will go for signatures. My mother will go for emotional authority. The most dangerous person may go for trust. I read that last line twice. The most dangerous person may go for trust. Ethan had always written like a man trying to sound calmer than he felt. By 9:30, I was in Arthur Bell's office in downtown Boston. Rain still hung over the city in a low gray sheet. The building lobby smelled like stone, paper, and sharp citrus cleaner. Outside, court flags hung limp in the wet air. Somewhere between parking the car and taking the elevator up, ordinary life had the nerve to keep happening around me. People lined up at the clerk's office. Someone cursed into a phone on the sidewalk. A courier jogged across Boylston carrying coffee. The world had no reverence for my emergency. Arthur's assistant brought tea. I didn't touch it. Arthur removed his glasses and studied my face. You opened it. They were moving before the funeral ended. He nodded once. I expected that. I slid printed copies out of my bag. I need the piece he said I wouldn't understand. Arthur folded his hands over one knee. Ethan created a holding vehicle around a series of voting rights tied to a private expansion arm. It was legal, disclosed, and intentionally easy to underestimate. Reed assumed the value sat elsewhere. Nolan doesn't understand corporate structure deeply enough to look for it. Elaine still thinks in terms of visible inheritance. What Ethan transferred to you was leverage, and not lifestyle. I held his gaze. Controlling leverage? Potentially decisive. That changed the air in the room. Arthur turned another folder toward me. Yesterday morning, before the reception, Reed's office contacted mine requesting an emergency review of temporary governance continuity. Last night, Nolan's counsel reached out to ask whether you'd prefer a family-led estate simplification process. Simplification, again. In ordinary speech, Arthur said, they're offering support. In legal speech, they're looking for speed. He opened another file. Ethan also instructed me to act immediately if anyone attempted to represent your interests without your consent. I frowned. Someone already has? He turned the page around. An email, an attorney I had never met, claiming he was in discussion with the widow. Gianna Holloway Mercer, regarding potential property transition and voluntary non-participation in business matters. My own name sat there like something stolen off my body. I never authorized anyone? I know. That was the moment anger finally arrived. Not hot, not wild, just clear, useful. Arthur spent the next hour walking me through what mattered. Probate petitions, insurance beneficiaries, bylaws, deferred voting mechanisms. The board could posture. The family could pressure. They could freeze rooms, invent urgency, wrap theft in concern. But they could not lawfully remove me if I moved before they cemented a narrative. So I moved. I signed a retention letter with Arthur. I froze all estate-related document processing outside his office. I authorized notices blocking unauthorized representation. I requested preservation of Ethan's digital executive records. I filed formal objections against any emergency governance action that touched spousal interests without review. The notary downstairs stamped the first packet while I stood there in damp boots and watched ink become protection. Paperwork can feel like loading a weapon when the other side expects tears. By lunchtime, my hands were steadier. By afternoon, I let them think they weren't. I called Elaine first. I'm sorry I've been distant, I said, and let my voice thin at the edges. I'm barely functioning. She exhaled like relief. Oh, sweetheart, of course. That's why we're stepping in. I may need help with some things. Anything. Maybe come by tonight. Just family. A beat. Then the satisfaction she tried to hide. We'll be there. I texted Reed next. I don't understand any of the company issues. Could you explain in simple terms tonight if you're already coming to the house? His response came back fast. Absolutely. We all want what's best for you. Men like him always do, especially when best has a signature line attached to it. Then I texted Ava. I'm having a rough evening. Could use you. She answered in under 10 seconds. I'll be there. Arthur did not love the plan. That told me the plan had teeth. You do not need to confront anyone tonight, he said. I'm not confronting them, I said. I'm measuring them. Arthur held my eyes for a second longer than usual. Then he said, Ethan once told me that when you were done being hurt, you became exact. It didn't feel like praise. It felt like a warning spoken with respect. Thus I went home and staged fragility with almost embarrassing ease. No makeup, hair down, one lamp on, Ethan's framed photo on the entry table beside condolence cards and a casserole dish from a neighbor I barely knew. Domestic grief. The kind people are comfortable walking into because it makes them feel useful. By 6:30, the cars started arriving. Elaine first, in camel cashmere and pearls. Nolan behind her carrying a bakery box he never opened. Then Reed and Celeste. Then Ava, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a grocery store bouquet and wearing concern so beautifully it almost passed as real. I had already set my phone to record from the bookshelf in the den. I had already duplicated every file. I had already uploaded the copies to encrypted cloud storage. And I had already texted Arthur. If I send one word, now, you send the hold notices. We sat in the living room while rain tapped the windows again like it had come back to watch the next act. Elaine took my hand first. You shouldn't have to think about any of this, she said. Ethan would want us to carry the burden. I know. Reed leaned forward, forearms on his knees, voice low and smooth. There are some temporary company documents, very routine, mostly to make sure no one bothers you while things settle. No one bothers you. One of the prettiest ways to say disappear. Do I have to do them tonight? Nolan answered before Reed could. It would help if you did. There are timelines, board expectations, tax complications. He said tax complications the way men say words they hope will scare women into compliance. Ava shifted closer beside me. Maybe just hear them out, she said gently. Then you can rest. There it was again. That small push. Soft. Plausible. Always in their direction. I turned to Reed and put confusion into my face. I don't even know what Ethan owned anymore. Everyone keeps saying different things. His eyes sharpened for a fraction of a second, then smoothed. His personal estate is one thing. His business assets are another. Most of the real control never touched household property. Lie, fast, clean, confident. Elaine squeezed my fingers. Ethan always kept work away from home. We all know that. What matters now is protecting family dignity. Family dignity, another phrase with a knife folded inside it. Would I have to move? That question landed harder than I expected. Nolan glanced at Elaine. Celeste looked at Reed. Ava looked down. No one is saying immediately, Nolan said. Immediately. There it was. Elaine softened her face even more. But eventually this house may not be practical. So many memories. So much upkeep. You're young. Starting fresh could be healthy. Healthy. Burden. Practical. Simplify. They had built an entire language to make theft sound caring. I lowered my eyes. Ethan mentioned a trust once. I never understood it. Reed answered carefully now. With respect, Gianna, Ethan left some things more tangled than they should have been. Arthur may dramatize that. He enjoys leverage. That interested me. Arthur's helping me. Nolan gave a short laugh. Bell's old school. He'll drag this through probate court for a year if you let him. And honey, Elaine added. Please remember that lawyers profit from conflict. That almost made me smile, considering someone had already invented a lawyer on my behalf without asking. I let silence sit in the room. Then Ava touched my sleeve. Maybe sign the temporary ones. just so everyone calms down. The entire room shifted at once, not visibly, internally. I turned my head and looked at her. Why are you so invested in that? She blinked fast. I'm not. I just hate seeing you overwhelmed. Celeste crossed one leg over the other and gave a sad little tilt of the head. We all do. Then Nolan opened his briefcase and brought out another folder. There's also a short occupancy transition acknowledgement, standard, in case the estate needs to reassess carrying costs. Occupancy transition acknowledgement. Yet they wanted me eased out of my own house before the funeral flowers died. I let my hand hover over the folder without touching it. Did Ethan know about this? No one answered quickly enough. That is the thing about liars under soft light. They always trust their faces more than their timing. Reed spoke first. Ethan trusted us to handle practical details. Us, not you. I stood up slowly. Excuse me, I need water. I walked into the kitchen while my phone kept recording in the other room. My reflection in the dark glass over the sink looked older than 28. Not stronger, just older. Behind me, the murmuring resumed. Nolan, low and annoyed. Elaine, sharper than before. Ava, quiet. Then Reed said something that made every nerve in my back wake up. If she found anything, yeah, Belle would have already made noise. I set the glass down without drinking. There are moments when grief stops being a wound and becomes direction. I went back into the living room holding nothing. I'm too tired to sign tonight. Elaine started to speak. I kept going. But leave them. I'll read them tomorrow with Arthur. There. Arthur's name. Nolan's jaw tightened. Reed stood. That's not necessary for temporary governance. It is for me. Ava looked at me then, with something almost like fear. Not because I was falling apart, because I wasn't. When they finally left, the house went so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum. I downloaded the recording, sent it to Arthur. At 12:14 a.m., he replied with 3 words. Good. Keep going. The next 48 hours became a war disguised as administration. And Reed's office sent clarification packets. Elaine sent a moving company referral. Nolan sent me the name of a realtor for future flexibility. Celeste dropped off soup and lingered just long enough to try peeking toward Ethan's study. Ava kept texting at odd intervals, asking whether Arthur had said anything alarming, which is not how a real friend phrases concern. Arthur filed preservation demands. I met a forensic accountant in a glass conference room near South Station who smelled like peppermint and printer toner and used words like cascade, concealment, and exposure risk without changing expression once. He confirmed that multiple internal transfers tied to Reed's expansion arm made no business sense unless somebody expected a leadership vacuum. Then I opened the storage box Ethan had mentioned. Inside were backup drives, then handwritten meeting notes, a second phone, and copies of board minutes covered in Ethan's margin notes. One note stopped me cold. If Reed pushes memorial timing and capital review in same week, he thinks outcome window is open. He had been mapping them while still making coffee with me, still asking if we were bringing a bottle of wine to Nolan's lake house on July 4th, still teasing me for color-coding old lease folders, just in case. There are private wars people fight beside you while still asking what you want for dinner. The second phone held messages between Reed and a contact saved only as A. At first, I thought accountant. Then I kept reading and understood. A was Ava. Not romantic. Worse. Useful. Strategic. Inside access. She had been reporting on me for weeks before Ethan died. My moods, my questions. But whether Ethan had told me anything, whether I suspected there was tension at the company. One message, sent the night before the funeral, read, "She's fragile and trusting right now. If paperwork is framed as stress reduction, she'll probably fold." I sat in Arthur Bell's office reading that line while traffic hissed under wet tires 12 floors below. Arthur watched my face. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry." That landed harder from him than all the soft voices at church had. How long do I have before they realize I'm not folding? Less time than we'd like, he said. More than they think. So we built the sequence. First, secure the estate and governance rights. Second, let them keep building their own public stage. Third, force documentary contradiction in front of the people who mattered. Fourth, but lock consequences in place before anyone could spin grief back into confusion. The cleanest venue was one Reed himself scheduled. A board and estate coordination meeting the following Tuesday in the firm's Beacon Hill conference suite. He thought it would formalize temporary control, establish my non-participation, and begin freezing me into ceremonial widowhood. Perfect. I told them I would attend. I told Elaine I wanted peace. I told Nolan I was too tired to fight. I told Ava I was grateful she had been there for me. Every lie I told them tasted medicinal. The night before the meeting, I sat alone at the kitchen island with Ethan's video open again. The dishwasher hummed. The hallway thermostat clicked before the heat came on. Across the street, someone had already changed their Christmas lights to white only, because even in our neighborhood, grief apparently had a color palette. I watched Ethan say my nickname again, Gigi. I paused the video there. Two kinds of love remain after betrayal empties a room. The love you gave, and the love you finally understand. I touched the screen once, then shut the laptop. The next morning, I dressed like morning had found posture. Black trousers, ivory silk blouse, camel coat. Small gold hoops, Ethan once told me, made me look like I already knew how the meeting would end. I carried a slim leather folder, not because I needed paper copies, but because upper-class men trust paper more than women until the paper starts speaking. Beacon Hill was wet brick, polished brass, and discreet wealth pretending not to perform itself. But the conference suite overlooked a narrow street lined with bare trees and expensive restraint. Inside, the room had walnut walls, recessed light, and one long table set with bottled water, legal pads, and pens branded with a firm name nobody in that room would have forgotten without help. Everyone was already there. Reed at the head of the table, Elaine in navy, Nolan in charcoal, Celeste dressed in concern. Ava at the far end, technically present as emotional support, which would have been funny if it weren't so obscene. Two outside board members sat to the left, company counsel to the right, Arthur Bell near me, the forensic accountant with his files, a probate liaison on speakerphone. Reed stood when I entered. "Gianna, we're glad you came." "I'm sure you are," he smiled at that. He still thought grief had made me strange, not dangerous. The meeting opened with the usual choreography, condolences, legacy language, references to Ethan's vision. A brief silence for respect that lasted exactly long enough to be socially appropriate and strategically efficient. Then Reed began. In light of Ethan's passing, and with Gianna's understandable desire for privacy, the board proposes a temporary transfer of operational control and suspension of non-essential spousal involvement while the estate proceeds through ordinary channels. Understandable desire for privacy. That was how he planned to disappear me on paper. Arthur spoke mildly. Counsel should note for the record that Mrs. Mercer has expressed no such desire. Reed didn't look at him. We're trying to spare her technical burdens. Arthur's tone stayed even. By inaccurately characterizing her position? One board member cleared his throat. Nolan leaned forward. No one is attacking Gianna. We're trying to keep the company from chaos. I looked at him. Then maybe start by not manufacturing my consent. That pulled every eye in the room toward me. Even Ava looked startled. as if somewhere along the way she had forgotten I was still a person and not just an outcome. Reed folded his hands. Gianna, emotions are high. There may have been misunderstandings. Misunderstandings are where cowards store intent. I opened my folder. Arthur, would you like to begin with the unauthorized representation attempt, the occupancy transition document, or the false statement about my lack of governance interest? Arthur did not smile, but something about the corner of his mouth almost did. Let's start with governance. He laid the certified documents on the table one by one. Trust records, transfer schedules, registry confirmations, holding company documents, a notarized beneficial control summary. Paper can sound quiet and still feel like gunfire. 8 months ago, Arthur said, Ethan Mercer lawfully transferred controlling conditional leverage tied to Hawthorne Meridian Holdings into a protected spousal structure naming Gianna Mercer as beneficiary with actionable authority upon triggering conditions already satisfied. One board member leaned back hard enough that his chair creaked. The probate liaison on speakerphone asked Arthur to repeat the effective date. Reed's face changed, only slightly, but permanently. Nolan looked blank, then angry. Elaine looked, for the first time since the funeral, her actual age. Reed found his voice. That structure was non-material. The forensic accountant spoke without raising his tone. It is not non-material. It is decisive if coupled with preserved voting rights and related exposure files. Reed turned sharply. Exposure files? That was my turn. The ones Ethan left behind for me after his burial. No one moved. I connected the drive to the room display, and when the silence came, it wasn't theatrical anymore. It was mechanical, like the whole building had paused. Ethan appeared on screen in his office, alive, tired, sharp. More alive in that room than half the people sitting around the table. If you're watching this in a formal setting, he said, then Reed either moved too fast, my family moved too greedily, or both. Nolan swore under his breath. Elaine's hand went white against the table edge. Reed reached toward the remote. Arthur's voice cut across the room. Don't. Ethan kept speaking. For the record, my wife is neither uninformed nor excluded from my intended protections. Any attempt to characterize her as emotionally unfit for governance, voluntarily detached from my business interests, or practically severable from the estate should be treated as self-serving at best. Reed stopped moving. Then Ethan looked straight into the camera. Reed, if you are present, then you know exactly why I recorded this. That landed cleanly. What came next was not one revelation, it was a staircase. And the spreadsheets first, projected line by line, then internal messages, then the unauthorized outreach using my name, then the occupancy transition document Nolan tried to sell as standard, then the voice memos placing Elaine, Nolan, and Celeste in conversations about protecting family optics. Celeste began crying around the fourth file. Real tears. Too late. Then I played the messages from Ava. Not all of them, only enough. Her words appeared on the screen in blunt black text. She's fragile and trusting right now. If paperwork is framed as stress reduction, she'll probably fold. Ava made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not grief, not regret. Exposure, breaking apart. Gianna. No. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. That one word landed cleaner than screaming ever could. Sound Elaine found her voice next. I was trying to protect my son's legacy. I turned to her. By removing his wife from her house and lying about his intentions? Nolan slammed his palm against the table. You don't understand how much pressure there was. I looked at him. Then enlighten me. He looked at Reed. Not at me. At Reed. Reflex. Instinct. Fatal. The board saw it too. Pressure leaves fingerprints in where people look. Reed straightened in his chair and reached for executive calm. Ethan had become unstable, suspicious. He was making irrational structural decisions and Arthur cut him off so sharply the room almost flinched. Be very careful with your next sentence. Reed held his stare and chose cowardice over restraint. He was not thinking clearly near the end. I pressed another file. Shed a medical letter filled the screen. Independent neurological clearance, 2 months before Ethan died. Fully competent. No cognitive impairment. No executive dysfunction. Beside it, a memo from Reed's own office referencing concern over closing the window before formal challenge. One outside board member slowly took off his glasses. "Reed," he said, "what exactly is this window?" That question lay flat across the table like a blade. Reed started talking too fast. That's how smart men confess without meaning to. We had financing exposure, timing issues, expansion commitments Ethan was jeopardizing, and yes, there was concern about how his death would affect continuity if governance rights stayed fragmented. Stayed fragmented? I said. Or stayed honest? He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if he had just realized I was not standing where they left space for me. There is a moment when predators understand the animal is armed. It is never graceful. The probate liaison requested immediate copies for the court record. Arthur requested the minutes reflect attempted misrepresentation of my position. The forensic accountant recommended an emergency internal investigation. One board member asked whether law enforcement should be notified regarding possible fraud, forged authority, and estate interference. Then came the last turn. I opened the file Ethan had marked final only. It was a short audio memo. His voice filled the room. "If Gianna chooses to play this, then I need the board to know one more thing. I did not keep my wife in the dark because she was incapable, and I kept her out because I was ashamed of how long I tolerated corruption beside me while calling it strategy. If she is standing in front of you, listening instead of collapsing, believe her over anyone making efficiency sound noble. A beat. Then this. And if Ava Marino is somehow involved, Gianna, I am sorrier for that than anything else." Ava covered her face. I did not look at her. Some betrayals arrive from enemies. Those have shape. The ones that come from trusted hands leave bruises with no edges. The meeting did not end in chaos. That would have been easier. It ended in procedure, which was better. Reed's access was suspended pending investigation. Nolan's estate interference was noted for court review. Elaine's counsel requested a recess she was not granted. Celeste left first, mascara streaked. So heels too loud in the hallway. Ava tried once to speak to me outside the conference room. I never meant for it to go this far. I kept my coat on, kept my folder closed. It usually does. "Reed said Ethan was cutting everyone out," she said. "He said you'd be taken care of." I looked at her then. "I'm not a pension." Her shoulders caved inward. "I was scared for my husband's job," she said. "I thought I was helping keep things stable." I looked past her to the wet brick rooftops outside the window. "A person can sell you out in a whisper," I said, "and still call it help." That was one of the lines people later repeated back to me. I walked away before she could cry in a way that would ask me to carry her too. The weeks after exposure were not cinematic, not really, no instant peace, no grand thunderclap of justice. Just filings, interviews, forensic reviews, reputational collapse, and the slow, stubborn grind of institutions deciding whether truth was expensive enough to matter. It mattered. Probate court recognized the spousal protections. The company opened a formal internal probe. The insurance carrier froze disputed disbursements. A regulator requested records tied to vendor flows. Reed resigned before they could force him out, which changed the headline but not the stain. Nolan discovered that family name performs badly under subpoena pressure. Elaine stopped calling me sweetheart, and the house stayed mine. That mattered more than I expected, not because of square footage, not because of property value, because every room in that house had been the scene of an actual life they tried to demote into sentiment. Mid the hallway where Ethan once pulled me into a slow dance because a Christmas song came on while we were carrying wrapping paper, The kitchen where he mocked my habit of keeping old apartment folders just in case. The back patio where we drank burnt coffee during a July 4th drizzle because fireworks got canceled and he said weather had done us a favor. Grief after justice is still grief. It just has cleaner air around it. A month later, Arthur came to the house with the final release packet. We sat at the kitchen island under the pendant lights while late afternoon sun warmed the marble. He laid down the last certified copy, the final court acknowledgement, and a small envelope in Ethan's handwriting. He anticipated your timing better than mine, Arthur said. That almost made me smile. After he left, and I stood alone in the kitchen holding that envelope while outside the neighborhood kept being offensively ordinary. A dog walker passed. A woman down the block unloaded groceries from the back of an SUV. Somewhere a leaf blower started up and then stopped. Life has no reverence for endings, it just keeps opening doors. Inside the envelope was a single note. If you're reading this, then you did what I hoped and what I feared I'd require of you. I know it cost you. I know I asked you to become colder than I ever wanted for you. Keep the house if it still feels like yours. Sell it if it feels like a museum. But don't let them turn our life into a footnote attached to my surname. You were never the afterthought in this story. You were the part I trusted most. At the bottom, he wrote, the drive was small because the truth didn't need to be large, only intact. I sat down very slowly. And for a long time I did nothing. No dramatic collapse. No beautiful movie tears. No performance. I just sat there in the quiet with that note in my hands, and the knowledge that the last thing Ethan left me was not money, not revenge, not even proof. It was position. He died knowing they would come for the record, and he left me the means to hold it in place. That is a different kind of inheritance. Winter thinned. The lilies died. The condolence cards went into a drawer. The borrowed casserole dishes went back to their owners. One afternoon I found the folded funeral program still in the inside pocket of the coat I had worn to the church. And for 1 second the whole night came back so sharply I had to grip the hallway table. Rain on glass, a wall clock ticking, Arthur's old briefcase, a piece of black plastic in my palm. Some objects divide a life into before and after. Not because they are valuable, because they arrive at the exact moment innocence expires. I keep the flash drive in the fireproof box now. Not on display, not romanticized, just protected. Small, silent, intact. And sometimes late at night, when the house is still and the heat clicks on and the world feels thin around the edges, I think about how close they came to burying me with him without ever touching my grave. They mistook grief for vacancy. They mistook youth for softness. They mistook quiet for surrender. They were wrong.